And today we have Abe Louise Young, and she'll be talking to us about all kinds of wonderful things. You can have a seat.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. And so our official bio states, Abe Louise Young is an independent writer, educator, and social justice activist. Her work has won a Grolier Poetry Prize, the Hawaii Review's Nell Altizer Award, and a Narrative Magazine Story Prize in the Academy of American Poets Prize. Her writing is forthcoming or has appeared in The Nation, Witness, New Letters, Feminist Wire, and many other journals. She's the author of 2 chapbooks of poetry, Heaven to Me, Headmistress Press, available in the back, out just very recently. And where'd I go? An Ammonite from Magnolia Press Collective. A lifelong social justice advocate, she's also the author-editor of numerous guides, including Queer Youth Advice for Educators, How to Respect and Protect Your LGBTQ Students, Hip Deep Opinion, Essays and Vision from American Teenagers, and an archive of oral histories with Hurricane Katrina survivors. Alive in Truth, the New Orleans Disaster Oral History Project. She is currently at work on a project about human rights abuses in Texas jails and a memoir. Young earned an MFA in creative writing from UT, where she was a Missioner Fellow, and a BA from Smith College. So, Abe Louise Young, everybody.
Thank you, Joe.
So, Abe, I'm going to ask the obvious question first, and one of those reasons is because I know there's a good story.
Okay.
So for years, not knowing you or hearing your name, but reading your name, because you've been around a bunch, I thought your name was Abe.
Why did you think that?
I don't know. Well, okay, we also had this discussion, because Abe and Louise don't go together.
In what way?
A male and female one. So I was being, yeah.
Yes,
So
yes.
your name sets up a dichotomy, makes people uncomfortable on purpose, I now understand. But will you tell us about being Abe?
Sure. Well, I changed my name. I started using, I didn't really like the name that I was given by my parents. And I feel like it's our right to choose have our own names, have names that feel good to us.
How old were you?
I was 18. So I actually, my birth name was Elizabeth, which, though I have to say, usually it's best not to ask people their birth names. In the transgender community, it's called dead naming.
Oh.
And it's an expression of respect for who the person is today, to just accept the name that they come with. But so I was looking for a new name for a long time, and I had a dream. So I had my name Elizabeth, and then all of the letters fell away except for the ABE in the middle, Elizabeth. So I took that. And I also, I had some qualms about it because it meant that a lot of times people will anticipate that I'm going to be a man. And it's gotten a little bit boring now after 20 years or so. But I like it because the things that we associate like masculinity and femininity with are often arbitrary and wrong. So I kind of like having a name that encapsulates the idea that those things are not, that we can discard those notions.
Okay. But it's Abe short for?
So then I legally changed my name to Abrielle.
Which sounds like an angel.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, that's like all those angel names that.
Yeah, Gabrielle and Uriel,
We
true,
went and saw
indeed.
Wings of Desire for Halloween.
Oh, God, what a beautiful movie.
Valentine's Day. Halloween, Valentine's
If you
Day.
haven't seen Wings of Desire, this is like one of the most poetic
Yes.
experiences on film that you can ever have
Gorgeous
in a
film.
human life.
Wow.
Yeah, beautiful.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm glad you like it too.
Yeah.
Just for fun, I had a friend, and her new name, she used her last name as Norton because it's not Ron backwards.
That's funny.
Leah Norton.
There were a lot of lesbians in the 1970s who kind of like did the tune in, turn on, drop out kind of thing, and established their own community is kind of outside of the modern economy, and a lot of them changed their last name to Van Dyke because they were fans. So there's like a whole lot of women legally changed their names to Van Dyke and drove around from land to land.
So now I'll start with my usual question, which is always, why poetry?
Wow. Why poetry for me, or why poetry for the world?
For you.
For me.
You can only speak for yourself right at the moment.
Thank you. I prefer that limitation.
Okay.
Well, I really can't do anything else, is the main reason. And I grew up in New Orleans, which is an extremely oral culture. And people are talking to each other on the street to just a wild degree compared to any other city. And I just really loved listening to individual people talking about their lives. And I couldn't make a plot out of it or really any kind of a story, but I could just listen to the beauty in the words and feel my physical responses. And so I started writing them down.
How old were you?
Gosh, the first poem that I remember, which I have committed to memory, but I can't tell it to you because it's very sad. I was 9 years old.
Wow.
But I had this sense from when I was 6 years old, I had a dream in which I was reading the most beautiful book in the world. And I was lying on a blanket underneath the stairs in my family home in the dream, just overwhelmingly happy, reading the most beautiful book in the world. And when I woke up, I was extremely distressed that I could not remember the words to the most beautiful book in the world.
Wow.
And that feeling stayed with me for years. I've lost this. I had it and then I lost it.
And now you have to write it yourself.
And now I have to write it. Yeah. So it was when I was a teenager. I was telling someone that story, and they said that clearly means that's your purpose, is to write that book or to find those words again.
So a calling.
A calling, yeah.
So early on, who were the poets that spoke to you?
Great question. There's a book of poetry put out by the Metropolitan Museum of Art called The Child's Garden of Verses.
Oh, yeah.
Do you remember this book?
It's
beautiful, right? And it has pieces of modern art, I guess going back to the Impressionist era, paired with poems that have a similar feeling. And I just read that. I read that book over and over again, and I was so charmed by it that I actually wrote a letter to the editor and sent it to the publisher, asking them to do another book so that we could have more poems. Yeah.
Well, give me a poem. Give me a poem and a painting.
A poem and a painting pairing.
What page would you ponder?
Oh God. Okay, you're gonna know this. Frank O'Hara. The main image of the poem is floating on the ceiling. No, I did not like cats. I did not like books. I disliked. Okay.
I'm sorry.
Well, I'll tell you later.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, cool. And so early on, you knew you were going to be a writer. You were loving poetry. So maybe more poems. Who's a poet that made you think, I can do this, and I'm gonna? Who's the poet that the corny phrases gave you permission?
Oh, that's a wonderful phrase. Well, I'm a writer and I'm also a writing teacher.
Right.
And so I feel like giving permission to each other is just an enormously important thing to do. So I really appreciate that phrase. And it was writing teachers who gave me permission. The writer Kurt Vonnegut famously said, you need two things to be a writer. You need to have something to say, and you need to have someone to say it to.
Okay.
And so for me, that was my writing teachers, were the ones that I could say things to. And also, the other side of the question of why poetry is because I had a lot of sort of inexplicable, inexpressible, ununderstandable experiences as a young person in a home that had a lot of violence in it. So poetry was the place where I could condense those feelings so tightly into exactly the words that would represent them that I felt like I could compress coal into a diamond, and then I had it there, and it was no longer like ambiently running around. So then when I think about what poetry did that for me, and the poets that I first started reading that really gave me permission to speak about extremely personal subjects, family, internal subjects, social and political subjects, are the confessional poets of the 1950s and 60s. I'm sure, I know that you know who they are.
This is a learning experience,
shall I tell you
yes.
all? The confessional poets of the 50s, 60s, and 70s were mostly women who were asserting an ethic that things that happened within the home, things about the body, things that were otherwise to be considered private, and not really the subject of great literature, should be exploded into visibility. So that's like Sylvia Plath and Sexton.
Those are the two big ones.
Those are the two big ones. And then
Robert Lowell?
Robert Lowell, absolutely. And coming out of the Beat generation, Allen Ginsberg, et cetera, people who had already kind of exploded the notion of things you can't talk about.
Diane de Prima.
Sex, drugs, et cetera. Diane de Prima, the female beat poet. Yeah, love her. So the confessional poets then really set up the stage for all of this, the poets of the different civil rights movements that ensued after the Beat generation, starting with the Vietnam War. So
Denise Levertov,
yeah, Audrey Rich.
Oh, yeah.
So then there are like incredible poets from each of those sort of time periods and first fomenting movements, like the women's movement, women's liberation movement, of course, the poets of the Black liberation movement.
We were just looking at Gil Scott-Heron last night.
Oh,
Right,
yeah.
class. I've got some students.
Oh yeah,
here.
you have students,
I'm very
yay.
happy.
Yeah, the revolution will not be televised.
No, it won't. Whitey's on the moon.
Indeed he is. Yes, indeed.
Okay.
Yeah,
excellent.
I love your questions, Joe.
Well, of course.
These are the best things to talk
And so the other half, you talk about somebody to say it to.
Yeah.
Started out with your creative writing teachers who were nurturing and encouraging.
Yeah.
Very important to get those.
Extremely important. If you ever have a writing teacher who just corrects you, fuck them. Like, don't. Just take another class.
We need to go on a quick side trip.
Sure.
So 2 poetry corners ago, we had Carrie Fountain,
Oh.
and she talked about how you stood up for her and in a poetry workshop,
Oh, wow.
and that you were her champion.
How lovely.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So speaking of creative writing teachers,
Yes. Yes.
so for you folks out there, what do you want to say for the folks out there about creative writing teachers beyond fuck 'em?
Oh, well, I mean, love them
more
first.
nuanced.
Love them. I mean, I think creative writing is a really interesting thing to try and teach because the most important thing is that people discover what they have to say and then say it fully and say it honestly and say it in their own way. So it's a lot more akin to art.
Well, it is art.
Yeah, it's art. It's a lot more akin to visual art
Okay.
than to academic writing. But I think sometimes teachers who don't really, who may not be practicing writers themselves, who are not,
They
they shouldn't
teach
really
it.
be trying to teach creative writing because the way of interacting with a student's paper is by correcting and suggesting changes and et cetera. And the poem or the story or the piece of creative writing, it's like this living, breathing, passionate thing on the page. And first of all, it just needs to be like received with a thank you. Like it's a gift. And so if you can imagine, we've probably all had the experience where we made something really beautiful and then someone was like, oh, I think you should change this part. And I didn't really, have you ever looked at their thing? That's what, so when that starts happening around your own creative writing, it can be incredibly discouraging. And so I feel like our world is just full of ugly language. It's full of people trying to use words in untruthful ways to convince us to buy things or to convince us to believe things. And so whenever someone makes that effort of finding something true within them and then offering it in an act of great vulnerability, which it is for any writer, even a writer who's 80 years old and has been doing it for 60 years, it's still an act of great vulnerability, then like the right writing teacher will make you feel cherished for having done that thing. They might challenge you to do it more clearly or more fully or more in your own voice, but they will cherish it first. I can't tell you how many people call me on the phone, because I lead writing workshops
Right.
and then I work one-on-one with writers. So many people call me on the phone are like, I haven't written anything in 20 years because just, this teacher gave me an F. And I'm like, oh God. How can we like dispel their power completely?
Exorcism.
Yeah, exorcism.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
How about you, Joe? I'm curious. Yeah, you are also a creative writing teacher.
I am a creative
So do you have a
writing teacher.
pedagogical philosophy around what you do?
Yeah, my main, well, let's see. What we do in class is we try to figure out what the poem wants to be. I really emphasize that the poem is not the poet any longer. The poem is something on its own. So the job of the poet then is to make the poem be what it needs to be successfully. And so sometimes there are suggestions, or sometimes there's clarifications. A lot of it is exposure, because I have a thing in the syllabus which I'm not deadly serious about, but it says for every poem you write you should read 100, and which is
Excellent.
poetically
Ratio.
true.
Yes.
But, and if you're going to become a good poet, probably true. But I had one student who just did not think that was reasonable.
Maybe as an assignment in a semester.
Yeah, it was not to be taken literally.
Yeah.
So, so the other half, we went off on the creative writing teacher side, but so you have to have somebody to listen or read.
Yeah.
Who do you envision? Who's your audience? Who's your
Such a
people?
beautiful question. Well, I think it differs depending upon the topic that I'm writing about, or the topic that's compelling me most right then. I think generally I envision people who are like emerging or coming to awakening, and or people who are actively in the process of healing.
Okay, so transitional places.
I guess transitional places, yeah.
Which is a place where you're vulnerable.
A place where you're vulnerable, yeah. A place where you're open and you need reflection. But I also try to keep conscious in my mind like a wide variety of readers, that I'm not just writing to white lesbians, basically. Like I could easily just accidentally speak to myself. And so I try and sort of test what I'm writing against my imagination of people from all kinds of different social locations. Which I think, like, as a writer with a lot of different privileges, we can't occupy any other body than we're in, but we can certainly take a lot of time and consideration and communication to make sure that what we're writing, or I do this, to make sure that what I'm writing isn't reinscribing some sort of system of oppression or priority, hierarchy of people's. So yeah, I also have a brother who's incarcerated for a long period of time, and so I think about people who are in those kinds of situations of like just utter deprivation, and what it is, what kind of words, how can I make my words so clear and so true that a person in a life situation like that could feel hope, or could feel a tether, could feel their own soul.
Okay.
So yeah,
All right,
a lot of
well-
issues, a lot of different audiences.
Okay. That kind of brings me, well, something, okay, I want to know this. This is for me. There seems to be, if you look at like best poems of 2015, a lot of poets are writing for other poets, or a lot of people seem to be
Yes.
writing for academe, and not for the
Indeed.
world in general.
Yeah.
What do you have comment about that, or any ideas there? Or, I guess another aspect, way to look at it was, so when you were in school and too accessible, or you're not using the kind of language or form that the poets, with a capital P, and it's the ones that write the poems, are wanting, or?
It's a great question. And it would be hard to answer that without offending anyone.
Okay, well,
but no, I can
from
speak to it
experience.
generally and from personal experience, yes. Well, there are, as you know, so many different schools and fields and subgenres, subcultures and subgenres of poetry.
Right.
And some of them are unintelligible to me. Some of them are about intentionally breaking down the connection between language and meaning so that it reflects the world that we're in which the connection between truth and things is fragmented.
Well said.
Thank you. I feel like the function of an artist, or at least the art that I like to read, puts the world back together again rather than fracturing it further. And especially like if you're writing for audiences like I described, you don't, if you heap insult upon injury, people already know that the world is fragmented and full of trauma. So I think it's beautiful to try that. I don't necessarily feel like it has utility. And then some poets are just all about the sounds of words and the complexity and the density of sounds. And I think that's also very beautiful. It's like it's like playing your own little stringed instrument, but it's for your own pleasure, or for the pleasure of others who find pleasure in that particular medieval stringed instrument. But yeah, if you're writing because you want the largest number of people to both feel what you have to say and to experience the beauty and power of language, then you're going to be slotted into a category that is called accessible.
Right.
And that is a lower category.
Which is...
It is seen as a lower life form
yeah,
in poetry.
Somewhat disturbing.
Yeah. Which pretty much sucks. Yeah, especially when we remember that like poetry is an oral art form. It's like we speak these words. So I have to read my work out loud to myself, and if it's not something that reading out loud could be understood, then I feel like I'm not really doing my job right. My job. Not like we don't get paid for this, but it is my vocation.
Yes.
Yeah.
So speaking
How
of
about
your
you?
job, I'm all about accessibility, and my joke was I write for people who don't read poetry.
Love it.
And,
Most people don't read poetry, so write for them.
yes, it's the majority of it. We get a bigger piece of the pie. So you've also mentioned you're a social activist, and your poetry goes across with that, activist poetry. So maybe you can talk about activist poetry and how to be successful at that. That was the topic of our discussion last night. And
in your class?
yeah, we did half the class. We always have a topic, and then the other half we workshop.
Oh, cool.
It's a
Sounds like
great class. It's
great
really
format.
fun. I have excellent students. Some of
Sweet.
them
Some
are
of
here
them are
tonight.
here. I see that.
Yes.
Wonderful.
How to
So activist poetry.
how to be successful, or how to strategies perhaps.
Another amazing question. I don't really think about myself as writing activist poetry, but I think my life, of course, is this major source of what I write about or feel and learn. So I very much want to bring all of my concerns into my poetry in the most personal and intimate way possible, because I feel like we have all of these issues in our world, obviously, like issues abound. And if we're going to transform our heart and mind or the heart and mind of another, it's going to be through the most like specific, detailed, close, personal, intimate look at how those issues affect people. That's my
But there's
belief.
a promise of transformation.
Well, transformation happens in many stages and many layers. I think the first would be simply witness. Like, these things are happening. I see them. Here's how they look to me.
Okay. I think that's something we forgot to get on the board, wasn't it, guys?
In your class.
Yes. We got all these other fancy strategies, but
Well, that's kind of like the
Obvious.
core impulse of
Yes,
poetry,
witness.
so maybe it's implied. Yeah, witness. You know, akin to being a documentary photographer or documentary filmmaker, like you're here at the scene, you're here at the war, you're here in the prison, and you're showing what you see. And then another stage would be, I think, to show the interior experience of seeing what you see. And to risk being wrong, which you have to do,
wow,
to talk about things.
which is a pretty big risk.
Very big risk.
You're not supposed to be wrong.
You're really not supposed to be
Unless
wrong.
you're taught,
Absolutely
all in
not.
school.
Yeah. And if you're a white person, you're not supposed to be wrong when you're talking about race. But if you don't try it, then you're actually like stopping. You're you're stopping the train in its tracks.
The odds are you're going to
The odds are
wrong
low
or
that you're going to
some-
actually have to be able to speak anything at all. And participating in the communication is what's important. So I think taking it within, and like if you're a person of wealth or privilege, to not talk about class because you think you're going to be exposed for being bad or wealthy, or to not talk about it because you feel like, oh, well, I don't know anything about the experience of these poor people over here, so I better not say anything about this at all, is a way of evading
Right.
grappling with the real subject. So I constantly tell myself, you can completely fuck up. Oh, you're probably going to fuck up. This is going to feel embarrassing. Try it.
It looks like you survived.
Barely, yeah.
So it's okay to fuck
I still
up.
have farther to go. Yeah, it's very okay to fuck up. And most people are really forgiving.
All right.
Especially if you hear them. So witness, and then I think taking it vulnerability, and then using what you've seen and felt in one situation as a springboard to bring in refracting other issues, other social concerns in the world, so you're painting a portrait of where everything is connected to everything else.
Oh, so you're back to
the
instead of
ecosystem.
fractioning,
Exactly,
fracturing, connecting.
Reconnecting, yeah. So I think these are three different artistic directions you can enter a poem in. And then you can break it down really simplistically into celebration and praise. This is something in the world that is going right. Thank you
Yes.
for this. Or lament and critique. And to be successful in the social activist poetry realm, I think you have to oscillate between the two.
Okay. Can't
You
just have the
can't-
same note.
Yeah, and it's very easy to stay on the same note of everything is terrible. Look at these
Right.
terrible things, because things are terrible. There's a lot of terrible things. But we're here because we believe that we can make them better. So showing how that looks, feels, happens is of equal importance. That's what I
Okay.
feel.
That's wonderful. I can think of nothing better to do now than to hear some of your poems. And I have 3 requests. So let me show you. These are Abe's books, and they are available in the back. This is Ammonite, and an ammonite is is it a crustacea? I see that it has that spiral.
Ammonites are 1 to 2 million year old sea creatures that are fossilized and beautiful.
They're mollusks.
They're
Mollusks, thank you.
Mollusks.
What makes a mollusk a mollusk?
Well, they have shells on the outside that are secreted and hard, and they have those are in the same family as or group as squids and octopi. And
Oh, really?
Those have a piece of shell on the inside a lot
Right.
of times, and they have a thing called a radula. There's all this technical crap.
Okay.
You
Well,
need to write a poem
yeah.
called "What Makes a Mollusk a Mollusk."
that's your assignment. Nobody gets out of here.
Nobody gets out here without writing about a mollusk.
Okay, so from Ammonite, there's a beautiful poem called Stamens.
Oh,
And
thank you.
and some I'm making requests.
Okay.
And
go for it.
also from Heaven to Me, which is from Headmistress Press in I forgot where they're from.
They
Washington?
are out of Washington,
Yeah.
yeah, and this is actually the first day that this book is available for sale.
Wow, so
It is the drop date.
bye, at the original day. So for having me, our class, we did Don't Decide to Die, and it was really, really nice. It was one of those encouraging poems that we all enjoyed, because
Thank you.
and especially in comparison to the other things we're reading. And then I really, really like Equality as well. So, if
Which
you-
I've never read out loud before.
oh boy, so we're in for
Because the book
a
just
triple
came out.
treat.
Could I use your copy?
Okay,
I don't know if
luckily
they've annotated
they're not
that.
annotated yet, so
Okay, great.
I won't embarrass
Are you
myself.
will you stay up here with me, or are you heading back?
I'm thinking you should have the stage alone. I don't
Okay.
want to be a distraction.
Cool.
But we'll
I,
come back, and then afterwards, folks will ask you questions. Would you like the
Lovely.
lectern?
Yeah, thank you.